They tried to take my land. Then a knock at their door changed everything, and it's my real-life story, and I would like to share to everyone for their life lesson. So, my name is Leonard William, though most folks around here just call me Leo, and I am 53 years old. If someone had asked me a few years back how life was treating me, I would have said it was steady, simple, nothing fancy, nothing stressful. I lived alone on the stretch of land my father left me. Land that had shaped our family for generations. A place where every ridge in the dirt, every patch of grass, every fence post felt like part of a story carved into time itself. That land was more than property. It was home in the deepest sense of the word. It was a living memory of my father, my grandfather, and even the hard times they endured. For years, I believed nothing could disturb the quiet peace I had built there. But life has a way of proving that even the calmest mornings can hide the heaviest storms. The morning everything changed started slow and gentle, the kind of morning where the air sits still like it is thinking. The sky had that soft, early light that feels like a promise. Birds were settling in the big oak tree out front, the same tree my dad planted when I was just a kid. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, breathing in the warm air, and thinking how another easy day was about to unfold. I did not know it then, but within minutes my whole world would tilt. It is funny how your life can feel perfectly normal one second, and the next it is sliding out from under you like a loose plank on an old bridge. When the knock hit my door, it was nothing like the gentle start to the morning. It came hard and sharp, almost angry. Not the kind of knock someone uses when they are dropping by to say hello. This knock felt like someone wanted to break the whole door off its hinges. My stomach tightened right away. Anyone who has lived long enough knows there are knocks that bring family and knocks that bring trouble. This one was trouble. I could feel it settle in my chest before I even reached the door. I had no idea that knock was the opening punch to a fight I never saw coming. I did not know that everything I thought was mine, everything I believed I had earned through years of sweat and blisters and heartbreak, was about to be questioned, challenged, threatened, overturned by people I never expected to turn on me. I did not know that when I turned that doorknob, I was stepping into a storm that had already been brewing quietly behind my back. Folks who have never worked land think it is just dirt, trees, fences, and maybe a house here or there. They think it is replaceable, movable, something you can sell, trade, or toss aside when the price is right. But to a man over 50 who grew up working the soil with his father, land is not dirt. Land is memory. Land is loyalty. Land is the one thing in this world that does not lie to you. It gives back exactly what you put into it. My father used to tell me the land is like a person. If you respect it, it respects you. If you care for it, it cares for you. And if someone threatens it, you defend it the way you would defend your own name. That lesson lived in my bones long before the day that knock came. So when I opened the door and saw a woman standing there holding an envelope, her face tight like she did not enjoy being the messenger, I felt that first cold punch of fear. Not fear of her, fear of what might be inside that envelope. My hands were steady, but my heart was not. I knew something bad was coming, something heavy, something that had no place in a peaceful life like mine. Before that moment, I honestly believed I had no enemies. I'm not a man who causes problems. I keep to myself. I help my neighbors when I can. I pay every bill. I live quiet. But trouble does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from people who smile at you at the grocery store. People who wave when they drive past. People who grew up beside you, who shared meals with your family, who used to toss a ball in the same dirt yard. People you trust without thinking. And when betrayal comes from those familiar faces, it cuts deeper than any knife. It hits you in places no doctor can fix. As I held that envelope, something inside me whispered that the world was about to crack open. The woman walked away as fast as she came, and I stood in the doorway staring at the thing like it was poison. I had no idea that this envelope was not the beginning of the storm. The storm had already started long before the knock. It had been building quietly behind my back, built by people who thought I was too old, too gentle, too trusting to fight back. People who looked at me and saw a man who worked alone, a man past 50, a man they believed would not push back if they pushed hard enough. They were wrong. I might be simple, I might be quiet, but I am not weak, I am not blind. And I am not the kind of man who lets others take what generations of my family built with their bare hands. What followed after that knock was a story that changed me down to my core, a story that tore my trust in two but rebuilt my strength, a story that taught me something powerful. Never underestimate the quiet man on the porch. He has seen more, felt more, lost more, and survived more than the loud ones ever will. And the quiet man knows how to fight in ways the loud ones never expect. I grew up on that land the way some kids grow up in a busy town or a noisy house. My world was wide open fields, a long dirt driveway, and the sound of wind moving through the tall grass like someone whispering secrets from way back in time. Dad used to say the land raises you just as much as your parents do, and I never understood that fully until I got older. He taught me everything from fixing fences before the sun even peeked over the hills to reading clouds like they were warning signs. He said the land watches you as much as you watch it, and if you pay attention, it will tell you when trouble is coming. Back then, I believed him, but I never imagined trouble would come from men who knew our family as well as any neighbor could. As years passed, I took over most of the work. I grew strong from lifting lumber and hauling tools by hand. I learned patience from planting trees and waiting seasons before they grew thick with leaves. I learned grit from winter mornings when the frost hit hard and chores did not care whether your hands were freezing or your back was stiff from yesterday. That land shaped me into a steady man. I was not loud or flashy or someone folks pointed at in town, but everyone knew I got things done. My father trusted me with the land because he knew I would protect it like he did. When Dad passed away, the silence on that land felt heavier. The kind of silence that presses against your chest when you realize you are alone in the world in a way you were not before. But the land comforted me. I walked the same paths he walked, fixed the same gates he once swung open, sat under the same oak tree he planted with his own hands, and little by little I found peace again. Not joy exactly, not excitement, but a deep calm that felt like home. Folks in town started calling me Steady Old Leo, and I took no offense at it. Steady is not a bad thing to be, predictable maybe, but honest. Some folks saw my quiet nature as boring. I saw it as contentment. Life out here did not involve crowds or noise. My nearest neighbor lived far enough away that you could yell for help and maybe hear your own echo before you heard their voice. But distance never bothered me. I liked waking up to birds instead of engines. I liked hearing my boots crunch against dirt instead of concrete. I liked knowing every inch of the land around me. In the daytime, I worked. At night, I rested. It was a simple rhythm, and I thought it would last forever. But peace has a strange side effect. It makes greedy men think your quiet life means you will not fight back. They see silence as weakness. They mistake calm for softness. And greed always looks for the easiest target. The trouble came in the form of the Miller brothers. Boys I had known since they were running around barefoot chasing each other near the creek. Their father was a hard-working man like mine. He treated his land with respect and often shared tools with my dad during the busy season. I grew up seeing the Millers as good folks, solid folks, never imagined their boys would turn out the way they did. After their father passed, something in those brothers shifted. Instead of honoring his work, they seemed to treat the land he left them like a burden. They sold off bits here and there. They borrowed money from the wrong people. They made deals they did not understand. It was like watching a house fall apart board by board. Everyone in town noticed, but no one wanted to say much. Some families fall apart slow and quiet like that. It is sad, but it happens. Over time, I started seeing the way they looked at my land. A little too long, a little too curious. Men with money trouble often look at another man's property the way a starving man looks at a full plate. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe they were just jealous. Maybe they wanted things they could not have. But then things started happening that made my stomach twist a little. One day I was out checking a fence on the far side of my property. The posts were holding up fine, and the wire was tight, so I took my time walking the line. That was when I heard voices. Low but rushed, like someone trying to hide what they were saying. As I got closer, I saw the Miller brothers standing near my fence line, holding measuring tape. They stepped back fast when they saw me, like kids caught stealing cookies from the jar. They tried to act friendly, acting like they were just checking for repairs on their side, but the story did not match their faces. Their smiles felt stiff and forced. Their eyes kept shifting like they were looking for a lie to grab hold of. I stood there listening to them talk, but I was not really listening to the words. I was listening to what was underneath. You live long enough, you learn that the truth is rarely in the sentences. It is in the pauses, the tone, the twitch in a jaw, the way someone avoids your eyes. Something was off and I felt it deep in my gut. But I kept my voice polite because that is how my father raised me. Always give folks a chance to be honest, even if they do not take it. They left quick after that, too quick. And as I watched them walk away, I knew they were not checking repairs. They were checking boundaries, testing limits, measuring not the fence but the opportunity. They saw a man past 50 working alone. They saw a quiet man, and they assumed quiet meant harmless. That was their first mistake and the biggest one. Over the next few days, I noticed little things that made me uneasy. Fresh tracks near my property line. Conversations that went silent when I walked into the store. Whispers I could not catch but could feel. The same way you feel a storm coming before the sky even darkens. Something was shifting, and not in a good way. I would wake up early, do my chores, and find my mind wandering back to those brothers and their rush to hide whatever they were doing. The land felt different too, like it was holding its breath. I know that sounds strange, but country folks understand. When trouble is creeping and the land feels tense, animals get quiet, air feels heavier. Even the sunrise looks different. One evening, as I sat on the porch drinking my coffee, I leaned back in the old chair Dad built and looked out across the fields. The sun was setting behind the hills and the sky glowed orange like the world was on fire, but in the best way. And I thought to myself, I will be damned if anyone tries to take this from me. My father worked himself to the bone for this land. My grandfather before him. I gave my whole life to it too. This place was not just mine. It was my family's entire story, written in sweat, calluses, and long days. And I knew without question I would fight for it no matter what came next. Little did I know trouble had already stepped onto the porch long before it knocked. The knock came late in the afternoon, that strange hour when the sun hangs low enough to cast long shadows across the porch but not low enough to cool the heat. I remember the way the sound echoed through the house, sharp and impatient, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't used to waiting. When I opened the door, I saw a woman dressed too clean for country roads. Sharp blazer, shoes that hadn't touched dirt a single day in their life, and a smile that didn't match her eyes. She introduced herself as an agent, though she never said from where, and before I could ask, she pushed a thick envelope into my hands like it was a gift she couldn't wait to be rid of. She turned to leave before I even had time to respond, walking fast down the path as if the dust might stain her polished heels. I closed the door and stared at the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have, like the weight inside wasn't paper but trouble. I sat at the table, slid a thumb beneath the seal and opened it. Inside was a notice, official-looking, stamped, signed, full of the kind of legal language meant to confuse the average man. It claimed that the boundary lines on my land were under dispute, that new documents suggested the Miller brothers were the rightful owners of a significant portion of my property. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the words to make sense. They didn't. They just made me angrier. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Boundary lines. Those lines were as old as the hills. My father marked them with his father. Every rancher around here knew where one piece of land ended and the next began. There was no confusion. The truth was carved into decades of history, into fences and maps and the earth itself. But this letter, this thing in my hands, pretended otherwise. Something about it smelled wrong. Not just the claim, but the way it arrived. Too fast. Too secretive, too polished, trouble dressed up in a Sunday suit. I didn't waste time. I headed straight into town, the letter folded and tucked inside my jacket like a burning coal I needed to put out. The government building was quiet that day, dust floating lazily through beams of sunlight while old ceiling fans groaned above. The town clerk, a man who'd known my father and grandfather, took one look at the envelope and frowned before he even touched it. When he finally opened it, his eyebrows pulled together the way they did when something smelled of lies. He ran his fingers over the paper, held it up to the light, muttered to himself about strange ink patterns and mismatched numbering. Then he said something that made my jaw clench. "The Miller boys were in here last week asking questions about deed transfers." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Not enough to knock me over, but enough to let me know the world I'd trusted was shifting. The Miller brothers, men I'd grown up beside, men I'd watched throw hay bales and chase their daddy's dogs, were trying to take what wasn't theirs. Not by force, not by a fair argument, but through forged papers, fake signatures, lies disguised as legal truth. The clerk shook his head, said he didn't like the look of it, said something felt off, but he couldn't do anything without proof. Proof. That word rattled in my chest like a loose nail in a board. I walked home slower than I'd left, the sun dipping behind the hills and leaving the sky bruised purple. My boots crunched on the gravel, but my mind was miles away, replaying every interaction I'd had with those brothers over the years. The borrowed tools they never returned, the awkward smiles, the way they looked at my fields last spring, too long, too hungry. All of it stitched together into a truth I had refused to see until now. The time I stepped inside my house, night had settled deep around the windows. I didn't turn on a single light. I just sat at the kitchen table with that letter spread out in front of me like a betrayal carved into paper. I thought of Dad, of the lessons he passed down without ever writing them. How he used to put a hand on my shoulder when I got angry and say, "Son, a man may try to take what's yours, but he can't do it unless you let him." I could almost hear his voice in the quiet, warm, strong, steady. But tonight, Dad's words didn't calm me. They set something burning inside me, something deep and old. A fire I hadn't felt since I was young and foolish and ready to take on the world. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal wrapped in disappointment, folded into a sharp edge of hurt I didn't expect. I had trusted those boys. Their father and mine worked side by side for decades. We grew up on overlapping land, shared seasons, shared harvests, shared stories. Never, not once, did I imagine they'd try to gut me from the shadows. I sat there until midnight, the house silent except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock. The letter lay there like a threat, and every time I looked at it, something inside me hardened. These men thought I was weak because I lived alone, because I kept to myself, because peace had settled into my bones. They thought a quiet man wouldn't fight. But they forgot one thing. Men who live with the land don't fear losing a fight. They fear losing what they've bled to keep. So I made myself a promise right then. A promise whispered into the empty kitchen, but loud enough to echo inside my chest. No one, and I mean no one, was going to take a single inch of this land from me. Not while I still had breath in my body. Not while my father's memory lived in every fence post and stone. If the Miller brothers wanted a war disguised as paperwork, I was ready to tear the disguise right off and show them exactly who they were dealing with. And that was the night everything changed. Morning on the farm usually starts quiet, soft, almost sacred. The kind of quiet where you can hear the dew sliding off the grass and the wind stretching itself awake across the fields. But that morning, the stillness broke before I even stepped out the door. There was a murmur, voices that didn't belong, low and careless. The kind of sound men make when they think they own the place they're standing on. I walked out toward the barn, the sun barely over the horizon, and there they were. The Miller brothers, both of them, standing with their boots planted deep in my dirt like they were checking the fit. They weren't looking for anything. They were performing. Laughing, pointing at the siding on the barn, pretending they were inspecting something. But their act was so sloppy I could have seen through it from a mile off. As soon as they noticed me walking toward them, their posture changed. Not with guilt. No, guilt takes a certain type of conscience they didn't have anymore. It was more like annoyance, as if they were disappointed that the man whose land they were trespassing on had the nerve to show up. The older brother spoke first, adjusting his hat like he was about to deliver news he thought I'd be forced to swallow. He told me, in this casual tone that didn't match the weight of his words, that they had already filed an official claim on their portion of the land. Said they were only there to assess the area that would soon return to them. His voice didn't shake, not even a tremor of uncertainty. That told me everything I needed to know. They had convinced themselves their lie was real. Then he said something that made the air feel heavy around me. Once the paperwork cleared, I needed to start moving my belongings. Moving my belongings. Off my land. Off the soil my father watered with sweat and sunburns. Off the earth my grandfather carved with his bare hands, long before the Millers even owned a fence post. Hearing those words out loud was like a slap, sharp, audacious, unreal. I asked where they got the documents. Simple question, straightforward, nothing fancy. You'd think if their claim was legitimate, they would answer right away. But their eyes, both of them, shifted like cornered animals. Not scared, just guilty. The older one looked at the barn walls instead of at me. The younger one stared at his boots as if the truth were written in the dust. People who lie always look everywhere, except the eyes of the man they're lying to. I repeated my question, slower this time, and that's when the mask cracked. The younger brother, the cockier one, the one who always tried too hard to seem tougher than he was, tilted his head at me and smirked. Actually smirked. Like this was some joke, like my entire life was just a bargaining chip in whatever trouble they'd gotten themselves into. He told me I should accept what's coming, like he was doing me a favor by warning me. Told me that fighting would only make things worse. And then, in this ridiculous mix of arrogance and borrowed accent, he tossed in a bit of faux Aussie slang. Mate, just let it go already. Like I was some confused old man clutching at land I no longer deserved. That line, that smirk, that tone. It was the kind of disrespect that didn't come from confidence. It came from fear disguised as bravado. Desperate men puff themselves up because they're terrified the truth will deflate them. And in that moment, everything clicked. Every strange look, every rushed word, every fake smile, every question they'd asked around town. Their desperation wasn't a secret anymore. It spilled out of their mouths with every sentence they tried to dress in authority. They weren't just trying to steal my land. They were sinking in debt. Drowning in bad decisions, running out of time. And they saw my land as their lifeline, an easy grab, as long as I stayed quiet. But here's what they didn't understand about a man like me. I may be older, I may work alone, I may mind my own business, but that doesn't make me weak. It makes me patient. It makes me calculating. It makes me someone who doesn't start fights but sure as hell finishes them. When the younger one turned his back to spit on the ground like he owned the place, something inside me settled into place. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, sharper, steadier. Clarity. I realized they had overplayed their hand. They thought fake documents and bold words were enough to scare me off my own birthright. They thought showing up uninvited and tossing threats around would make me fold like some tired old man ready to walk away from the only home he'd ever known. They thought I would take their betrayal lying down. But what they gave me that morning wasn't fear. It was evidence. Evidence of their arrogance. Evidence of their carelessness. Evidence of their desperation. Desperate men make mistakes. And mistakes can be ammunition. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten back. I didn't let them see the storm rolling in behind my eyes. I just nodded slowly, taking in every word they said, every twitch of guilt, every stumble in their confidence. Because when you're planning to take someone down, you don't waste time shouting. You gather information. You watch. You wait. And in that moment, I made a decision so calm it scared even me. If the Millers wanted a war, they had just fired the first shot. And I was going to make sure they remembered. You don't cross a man who has nothing left to lose, but everything worth fighting for. When I left the Miller brothers near my barn that morning, I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing anger on my face. I kept myself steady because anger burns fast, but quiet thinking burns slow and clean. I walked back inside my house feeling that slow burn settle in my chest, the kind of burn that does not explode. It focuses. It sharpens. It tells a man that the time for patience is over and the time for action has begun. I knew I could not fight their lies with emotion. I needed truth. The kind of truth that stands so solid, even liars cannot bend it. I drove to town without telling a soul where I was headed. The sun was high and bright, but all I could think about was how deep their betrayal went. They had forged documents. They had stepped onto my land as if they already owned it. They had spoken to me like I was some tired old farmer too worn out to defend what my father left behind. They believed I had already lost. That belief was going to be their downfall. I went straight to the one man who knew this county better than anyone. Old Howard, the oldest surveyor still working these parts. He used to run the county office back when I was a teenager hauling tools across fields for my dad. His memory was sharp as a thorn even at his age. He had lines on his face that looked like maps all on their own. When I walked into his office, he looked up from his desk with those steady eyes and said he knew something was wrong just from the way I was standing. I laid the documents on his desk without saying a word. Truth is, I did not need to explain much. Howard could smell lies the way a dog smells smoke. He put on his glasses and leaned over the papers like he was studying an old treasure map. He traced the lines with his finger, looked at the seals, made a low sound in his throat. Then he leaned back in his chair and told me the Miller brothers were fools for thinking this kind of forgery would pass his eyes. He said the signatures were wrong, said the ink looked too new, said numbers had been changed, said someone had dug through old county archives and pulled out outdated records, hoping no one would compare them to the updated files. According to him, the Millers or someone working with them had taken half truth and half trickery and stitched them together into a lie that looked official but fell apart the moment a real expert touched it. He stood up and walked to a cabinet that creaked like it had not been opened in years. He pulled out files so old the pages had turned the color of weak tea. Dust rose in the air like a tiny storm when he opened them. These were records older than me, older than the Miller brothers, older than any modern map. He spread them across the table so carefully you would think he was handling something sacred. We spent hours going through the documents, comparing measurements, checking signatures, matching boundary lines that were set long before the Millers were even born. Every single piece of evidence proved the same thing. My land was mine. My father had bought and paid for every inch. And there was no loophole, no technical twist, no forgotten clause that could change that. The Miller brothers had not made a mistake. They had created a lie, on purpose, with intention, with planning. They thought no one would check. They thought they were dealing with a man who spent his days fixing fences and drinking coffee on the porch. A man too simple to see through their scheme. They thought wrong. Howard slapped his hand on the table and told me we needed to gather everything. Every map, every record, every signature, every archived page showing the history of my property. He helped me make copies, high-quality ones, the kind you present to people who matter. He drafted a report in handwriting so neat it looked typed. His confidence in me made something inside my chest unclench for the first time in days. But I knew this was only the beginning. Truth on paper was one thing, stopping liars was another. So after leaving the surveyor office with a folder thick enough to be a book, I did the next thing old Leo would never have done years ago. I called someone who owed me a favor. Back in high school, I had a friend named George. He was always the quiet kid, the one who kept to himself but noticed everything. While others chased fun, he chased knowledge. While others caused trouble, he studied people. Everyone said he would end up in some detective job one day, and they were right. He became a professional investigator years later, and despite moving away, he still came home for holidays. We had shared beers on my porch just last summer, laughing about old memories. I called him and told him I needed help. I could hear the shift in his voice when I explained what had happened. The Miller brothers had crossed a line, and I was not asking for revenge out of anger. I wanted justice that would stand firm. Justice that no one could poke holes through. Justice that would show everyone in the county the truth so clearly that even the Millers could not twist it. George told me he would drive down that same day. I spent the afternoon gathering everything I had: photos of the land from years ago, receipts, letters from my father, anything that might help. As I laid everything across my old wooden table, I felt something rise inside me. It was not rage, it was resolve, a new strength I thought I had lost with age. Quiet men think quiet and strike hard. And I was ready to strike. George arrived just after sunset. He shook my hand with a grip that told me he meant business. He went through every piece of evidence with a seriousness that reminded me why he was the best at what he did. He said we had enough to expose the brothers and anyone helping them, enough to bring this whole scheme crashing down on their heads. We built a plan long into the night with no need for shouting or threats, just calm voices, steady thoughts, and truth on our side. Because revenge built on anger burns out fast, but revenge built on truth becomes justice, and justice lasts. The plan had begun, and the Miller brothers had no idea what was coming for them. The days that followed were slow on the surface, but underneath everything was moving like a deep river you cannot see until it pulls you under. George settled into the spare room at my place and worked from the moment he woke up until long after the sun dipped behind the hills. He was quiet in the way men are quiet when their mind is chewing through knots. His calm reminded me that the best fights in life are won not with fists but with facts, and we were gathering facts by the hour. He started with the Millers' bank activity. It did not take long for him to crack through the little walls they had built around their finances. He told me their money troubles were worse than I had imagined. They had drained whatever their father left behind. They had borrowed from lenders no sane man goes near. Their debts had stacked so tall that soon they would not even own the boots they stood in. Every move they made was desperate, and every desperate move pointed back to one thing. They saw my land as their golden escape. What pushed them over the edge was something I never guessed. Someone had tipped them off that the ground under my land was worth more than the soil on top. Mineral value, hidden resources, something that could line their pockets if only they could get control. Greed does not knock. It sinks its teeth in and pulls. They were not chasing family history or some old claim. They were chasing money, pure and simple, enough money to pull them out of the pit they dug themselves into. While George traced their finances, he also dug into the forgery. He located the person they paid to doctor the documents, a technician who used to work for the county, someone bitter after losing his job, someone willing to twist records for a price. George found messages, transfers of cash, notes exchanged late at night. He followed the trail from inbox to bank statement to downloaded files, and every step led back to the Miller brothers. They had planned the lie months before knocking on my door. They had even tested smaller forgeries on tiny parcels of land to see how far they could push the system before going after something bigger. They thought no one would notice. They thought no one would dig deep. They thought the truth would stay buried under their greed. But truth has a way of rising the same way water finds a crack in a dam. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. While George was pulling their skeletons out of closets, I made sure my side of things looked calm. I fixed my fences. I walked the property. I stood at the hardware store catching up on small talk like nothing was wrong. I kept my voice steady and my expression plain. I let the Miller brothers believe they had scared me into silence. Let them think old Leo had accepted his fate. And they played right into it. They strutted around town like roosters thinking they had won. They walked into the grocery store whispering to folks that soon they would be expanding their land, that I was stepping aside, that I knew I had lost. They bragged loud enough to make sure the words traveled. They wanted the attention. They wanted the celebration before the victory, and people listened. But no one came to me. No one wanted to stir trouble. Country folks may like gossip, but they hate being caught in the middle of a feud between neighbors. I noticed some folks avoiding eye contact, some giving me the type of slow nod that says they feel sorry for you but do not want to be involved. Others whispered behind their hands when I walked by. I pretended not to notice. I pretended everything was fine. That calm act was part of the plan. Let them think the old man was blind. Let them think he was broken. Let them think their scheme was working. It was not weakness, it was strategy. Trouble was already stirring. It had been stirring since the moment that fake notice landed in my hands, and I was letting it boil, letting the pressure rise, letting every piece slide into place until the moment it would all come crashing down on their heads. They had started this fight thinking they were the hunters and I was the prey, but they forgot something. Quiet men do not show their claws until the right moment. Quiet men do not roar until the echo is strong enough to shake the walls around them. Quiet men think quiet and strike hard. And I was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The day the truth finally came for the Miller brothers started like any other morning in our small county. The sun was slow rising over the fields, and the air held that familiar quiet before folks started their day. But under that calm, something heavy was moving. Something steady. Something they never saw coming. George had spent weeks pulling together every thread of evidence, every message, every altered file, every forged number, every secret they thought would stay buried in old dusty drawers. He worked with a patience only a man trained to see lies could have. When he was finally done, he placed the finished stack of evidence on my table. It was so thick it looked like a book you could put on a library shelf. He told me it was time. Instead of calling the local deputies who were friendly with the Millers and often shared stories and drinks with them at the bar, he reached out to a higher office. The kind of authority that did not care about family history or neighbor ties or old favors. These were people who dealt in truth, not stories. They did not play social games. They did not bend rules because someone bought them a beer 5 years ago. They followed evidence like bloodhounds, and when they arrived with purpose. George handed over everything. They checked every line on every page. They spoke to the county clerk who confirmed the strange ink and outdated forms. They questioned the old technician who had altered the documents, and he cracked the moment they laid the evidence on the table in front of him. He confessed to being paid to doctor the files. He confessed that the Millers had approached him with promises of quick cash. He confessed that they had planned the land grab from the beginning. With that confession, the case was sealed tight. There were no loose threads left for the Millers to pull. No story they could spin to escape what they had done. Their plan had been greedy and sloppy and full of holes, and now the truth was finally knocking on their door. It was almost exactly a month from the day I received that fake notice that the authorities drove down the dusty road to the Miller property. I was standing on my porch drinking my morning coffee when I saw the unmarked vehicles roll past. They did not use sirens. They did not need to. The sight alone was enough to turn the head of every neighbor within view. We all knew something big was happening, and I knew exactly where those vehicles were going. I stood still and watched them disappear around the bend toward the Miller house. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I felt a calm settle over me that I had not felt since the day before the first knock at my door. It felt like breathing after holding your lungs tight for too long. It felt like balance being restored. Justice arriving dressed in quiet professionalism instead of anger. Neighbors told me later what happened next. The knock that hit the Miller door sounded just like the one that had jolted me awake weeks earlier. That same heavy echo that vibrates through a house and into the bones of whoever hears it. But this time it was not fear inside me. It was relief. A slow, steady wave of it rolling through my chest. The Millers opened the door expecting something simple. Maybe a package. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe some visitor stopping by for a short chat. They had no idea the tide had turned. No idea the case had already closed around them like a trap built piece by piece while they strutted around town bragging about land they thought they already owned. Instead of a friendly face, they came face to face with officers from the higher office. Officers holding folders filled with the same lies the Millers had created. Officers holding official documents stating they were under investigation. Fraud, attempted land theft, falsifying legal records, tampering with county archives, charges that carried real weight, the kind that leave a permanent mark. Neighbors said their faces went pale so fast it looked unnatural, as if the color had been drained right out of them, like snow falling on hot pavement disappearing before it even touches the ground. All that cocky confidence they had paraded around town vanished. All those loud claims about taking over my fields melted. Every smirk, every brag, every careless word turned into silence. The older brother tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to twist the story like he always did, but the officers cut him off. They told him this was not a discussion. This was not a negotiation. This was an investigation based on evidence that could not be argued with. The younger one stood behind him stiff like a man caught in a spotlight. He looked like a boy who had been playing a game he did not understand and finally realized the stakes were real. His hands shook. His voice cracked. He kept looking around like he was searching for an escape route that no longer existed. Word spread through the town within minutes. Folks who had avoided talking to me earlier now whispered with wide eyes. For weeks they had believed the story the Millers told. They thought old Leo was about to lose his land. They thought the brothers were telling the truth. Now they saw who the liars really were. And as those officers stepped inside the Miller house to search for more evidence, a neighbor told me something that stayed with me. He said the knock that morning sounded different. Not angry, not threatening, just firm, like the sound of truth arriving at a door where lies had lived too long. And that was the moment everything shifted. The day of the hearing felt unreal, like the kind of morning where the air itself holds its breath. I arrived early, wearing the same boots I wore the day my father taught me how to mend a fence. I wanted to walk into that room carrying the memory of where I came from. The courthouse was buzzing, doors opening and closing, boots on tile, whispers traveling from bench to bench like small gusts of wind carrying rumors. People from every corner of town showed up, folks who pretended they didn't know anything when the Millers were running their mouths, folks who looked away out of fear or loyalty or just plain cowardice. But now that truth was finally cracking open. Suddenly everyone wanted a front row seat. Human nature, I suppose. The Millers walked in a few minutes later, trying hard to look calm, but the cracks were showing. Their collars were stiff, their shirts tucked in too tight, faces pale like someone had wrung out every ounce of color. They looked around the room like they were searching for allies, but all they found were curious eyes and people shifting back in their seats. Their arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a twitchy nervousness. They weren't kings of the county today. They were just three men caught holding a bag of their own lies. When the hearing began, everything slowed down in that way life sometimes does right before something big happens. Papers rustled. The judge adjusted his glasses, and the clerk spoke with a tone so official it almost echoed. My investigator friend laid out evidence with the kind of precision only a man trained to see what others hide can deliver. He opened files, pointed to signatures, compared maps, explained inconsistencies so calmly you'd think he was teaching a class instead of exposing a crime. And then it happened. The moment the forged signature was placed side by side with the real one. Side by side the map with doctored boundary lines. Side by side the payment transfers, the messages where they talked like vultures circling meat that wasn't even theirs. A hush fell over the room, the kind of hush you feel in your bones. The judge leaned forward. Even he looked surprised, and judges don't get surprised easily. He stared at the brothers like he couldn't quite believe grown men thought they could pull off something this sloppy, this cruel, this reckless. The Miller brothers shifted in their seats, sweat gathering around their hairlines, one of them wiping his palms on his jeans like the truth was physically leaking out of him. They tried to talk their way out of it. Of course they did. First they claimed misunderstanding, then confusion. Then blame started bouncing between them like a hot coal nobody wanted to hold. The oldest one said he didn't know the papers were fake. The middle one said he only signed what he was told. The youngest said it was a simple mistake, like forging land records was something that happened on a casual Tuesday afternoon. The judge cut through their excuses with one sharp phrase, "Keep talking." And he didn't say it kindly. He said it like a man giving them enough rope to hang themselves. They swallowed their words after that. When the judge finally called my name, I stood up slower than expected. Not because I was nervous, but because the weight of the moment deserved that kind of respect. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't throw accusations like they did. I just told the truth the way it happened. I told the room how my father built that land with his hands, how every fence post and every corner marker was put there with intention. I told them how I kept to myself, how I worked quietly, how some people look at a quiet man and assume his silence is weakness. But silence isn't weakness. Silence can be patience. Silence can be calculation. Silence can be the sound of someone watching you bury your own trap. I explained how the Millers showed up, how they pushed, how they mocked, how they tried to intimidate a man who had already lived enough years not to be fooled by young arrogance disguised as strength. I talked about the fake documents, the shifting eyes, the smirks they wore like badges. And the whole time I spoke, the Miller brothers sat there shrinking, eyes fixed on the floor as if they were trying to disappear into the wood. When I finished, the judge didn't speak right away. He looked at me, then at them, then at the towering stack of evidence that might as well have been a mountain made of their mistakes. When he finally did speak, the entire room seemed to exhale. He ruled the documents they submitted were forged, ruled the land belonged to me without a shadow of doubt, ruled they would face charges for fraud, falsification of legal records, and attempted land theft. His gavel came down like thunder, sharp and final, like the sound of justice snapping back into place. As I walked out of that courtroom, sunlight hit me in the face, warm, steady, familiar. I stepped onto the courthouse steps with my name cleared and my land protected, the same land my father entrusted to me, the same soil that held every memory worth holding. Behind me, the Miller brothers walked out looking like men who just realized the world they thought they controlled had vanished out from under them. They didn't talk. They didn't glance at me. They moved fast, as if trying to outrun the consequences that were already nailed to their backs. They lost everything they tried to steal, and I regained everything they tried to take from me. Justice didn't whisper that day. It roared. After the storm of lies, threats, and courtroom battles, life finally began to settle again. The kind of quiet that comes not from the absence of trouble but from having faced it and survived. Walking out onto my land in the early morning, I felt the weight of those weeks slowly lifting, leaving a calm so deep it felt like the earth itself was exhaling. The air smelled the same, warm and dusty with the faint scent of pine and tilled soil, but it carried a different meaning now. Every tree, every fence post, every patch of earth seemed alive in a way I hadn't noticed before, as if they were aware that their rightful steward had returned. I spent my days tending to the land as I always had, but this time each action carried a layer of reflection. Fixing fences wasn't just maintenance, it was a statement of presence. Trimming the trees wasn't just about keeping the orchard healthy, it was a reminder that life continues and thrives when nurtured with patience. I walked the rows of crops and pastures, noticing the little things Dad had taught me, the way sunlight hits the leaves at dawn, the way the soil feels just before rain. All those small details became a meditation, a way to reconnect with the roots that went deeper than legal papers or greedy hands. Millers kept their distance, the same way shadows keep away from the brightest light. Their arrogance had been stripped away publicly, and what remained of their reputation dissolved like mist under the morning sun. They sold off pieces of their remaining property to cover the fines and restitution imposed by the court. Some of the old-timers in town said they were planning to move far away, start over where no one remembered the misdeeds they had tried to get away with. I didn't follow up. I didn't taunt them. I didn't waste breath on vengeance now that justice had been served. My victory wasn't in gloating. It was in the quiet restoration of what had always been mine, and in the knowledge that truth, when carefully applied, prevails. Folks around town began looking at me differently. They stopped whispering behind their hands, stopped giving the Miller brothers' words any weight. Some came by the porch to nod quietly, share a brief handshake, or ask for advice about land or fences, things that once would have seemed ordinary but now carried a sense of connection forged in the fire of trials endured. I realized that a man's reputation, once shadowed by others' lies, can be rebuilt stronger through patience, evidence, and steadfastness. Evenings became my favorite again. Sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the sun slip behind the hills, I could almost hear Dad's voice carried on the breeze. He would have smiled at the sight of the land thriving, at the justice served, at the lesson that silence is not weakness but a tool. I thought about the Millers and the choices they made, the greed that had blinded them, and the arrogance that made them think they could take from someone who had lived his life building, patiently, steadily, quietly. I didn't feel anger. I felt pity for them, tempered with relief that their actions no longer had power over me or my land. The lesson settled in like a quiet friend. Life is long, and patience is a weapon stronger than the loudest shout. Some men will mistake calm for weakness, greed for opportunity, and silence for surrender. But when the quiet man acts, he does so with thought, precision, and inevitability. That lesson, once learned, becomes part of you in a way that fear or anger never can. I continued my routines, fixing fences, trimming trees, tending the soil, but with a new awareness. Every swing of the hammer, every rake through fallen leaves, every footstep along the path was a celebration of resilience. Life returned to normal, yes, but normal had been redefined. It was richer, deeper, more meaningful because it had been earned. And the land, patient and steady like it always had been, seemed to hold its own quiet approval. Peace had returned. The Millers had lost, but more importantly, they had learned something too, whether they admitted it or not. And I, Leonard, had not only saved the land but reminded myself, and everyone watching, that truth, patience, and steadfastness carry a power that cannot be stolen or forged. The story had ended, but the lessons lingered in every fence, every tree, every sunset I watched from my porch, and in the quiet knowledge that sometimes the strongest victories are the ones you win without raising your voice. Looking back on everything, I realize now that life has a way of teaching lessons through fire, through patience, through moments when the world seems intent on testing every ounce of your resolve. People often think strength comes from shouting louder than the next person, from standing up and showing your fists, from proving yourself in ways everyone can see. But that is not the kind of strength that lasts. I learned the hard way that real strength is quiet. It is steady. It is the kind of power that grows in silence while others rush to prove themselves through noise and bluster. I learned that standing firm, even when the world doubts you, even when those you trusted try to take everything you love, is the most powerful thing a person can do. I am 53 now, and I spent my life quietly tending the land my father left me. I thought that quiet life meant peace, but it also taught me patience. I learned that a quiet man can protect everything he holds dear, not by fighting blindly, but by watching, by understanding, and by acting with care and precision. Anger can be tempting. Vengeance can feel sweet in the moment. But truth, patience, and careful planning, they last. They endure. And when they are finally put into action, the results are undeniable. The Miller brothers thought they could intimidate me with noise, with threats, with forged papers and hollow confidence. They thought that my quiet nature meant weakness. They could not have been more wrong. I learned that betrayal, as deep as it cuts, can also teach the clearest lesson. I learned who people truly are not by what they say in the light, but by what they do when they think no one is watching. The Miller brothers revealed themselves completely, not through words, but through their greed, their carelessness, and their desperate actions. And while the pain of betrayal is sharp, it also became my guide. It showed me the importance of vigilance, the value of patience, and the power of truth. I saw firsthand that when a person is pushed to the edge, when the foundations of their life are threatened, The choices they make define the rest of their story. No matter your age, no matter how others perceive you, no one has the right to take what you have earned. No one has the right to diminish the work you have put into building your life. We all have our own lands, literal or figurative, the pieces of life that hold our sweat, our memories, and our love. It is our responsibility to protect them, but also to do so with intelligence and quiet courage. The world respects persistence and preparation more than loud declarations. And when someone thinks they can undermine you, remember that patience and truth are more powerful than anger and noise. My land is still here. Every fence, every tree, every patch of soil carries my family's history. My story is still mine, and I carry it with a quiet pride that comes not from victory alone but from the way I achieved it. I know now that when someone challenges what is yours, when they try to take what you love, the response does not have to be loud, it only has to be certain. And if someone ever tries again, they better be ready for the knock that comes back their way, the one they will never forget. This story is not just about land. It is about life. It is about patience, integrity, and the quiet power we all carry if we are willing to stand for what is ours. And for anyone listening, remember this. Even in the quietest moments, even when the world doubts you, even when betrayal cuts the deepest, your truth is your strongest weapon. Guard it, wield it wisely, and never underestimate the quiet man who has everything to lose and everything worth protecting. The land, like life, teaches lessons, and in the end, the lessons that last are the ones written in patience, in courage, and in the unwavering resolve to protect what you love.